In some articles and books published in the last 20 years, the American philosopher Terry Pinkard has suggested to reinterpret the Hegelian concept of Geistes, identifying it with the notion of Lebensformen, thereby making explicit reference to this concept as derived by Wittgenstein's philosophy. To the best of my knowledge, this terminological choice has not been explored so much in the commentary literature. Aim of my talk will be to clarify some consequences of this claim. The reason why I want to explore more in depth Pinkard's suggestion is because I think that it might exhibit some interesting features. Both the notion of Geistes for Hegel and Lebensformen for Wittgenstein, aside from Pinkard's way of defining the first notion in terms of the latter, disclose, in my opinion, a peculiar complexity which does not allow the mutual reduction through their identification. Due to the vastness of the matter, my talk will have mainly a descriptive and introductory role. First of all, I will try to give a very general presentation of Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, as it has been interpreted by Pinkard in his 1996 book. After that, I will expose Pinkard's definition of Geistes in terms of Lebensformen. I will then stack a little bit on the two concepts at stake in the talk. I will firstly concentrate myself on the notion of Lebensformen in Wittgenstein, resuming some issues raised by the interpreters. Then, basing myself on some remarks made by Angelica Nuzzo, I will try to sketch some interesting features of the notion of Gestalten in Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. The expected results of my analysis are both negative and constructive. First of all, with respect to the negative part, I will express disagreement with Pinkard's theory for some precise reasons, which mainly regard philological perplexities I have about the precondition of his interpretation. Secondly, I will try to stress a possible contradiction in Pinkard's account, which involves the way in which he interprets the notion of form of life. On the one hand, Pinkard considers the possibility to shape in a different way this concept in Wittgenstein and Hegel. This seems to me a bad choice, since in this case the equation with the Gestalten Geistes does not hold, or at least it is no more an identity. I will suggest then a positive solution to the puzzle, which might reveal also an interesting insight for what concerns Wittgenstein. So, first part, Pinkard's interpretation of the phenomenology. Terry Pinkard has given its exhaustive, although controversial, interpretation of the Hegelian phenomenology of spirit in his 1996 book, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit and the Sociality of Reason. The texts I will consider in this overview on Pinkard are the three: the aforementioned Hegel's Phenomenology and two later articles. I am well aware of the fact that Pinkard has recently published two other volumes, the last one in 2016, which might reasonably examine if we want to look at how he uses the notion of form of life. I will assume from now on that this concept has not been changed so much in its theoretical shape by Pinkard. His interpretation, as Luca Corti pointed out, has in some extent changed during the time with respect to the original formulation, also with respect to the topic of this talk. Following the reconstruction of Luca and the first chapter of Pinkard's book, Why the Phenomenology of Spirit, I will try firstly to resume the main features of his original interpretation. 1a. Within the book, Pinkard defended a non-metaphysical view of the Hegelian Geist. This label has been originated by an article published in 1974 by Klaus Hartmann, which gave rise to this interpretative style of the philosophy of Hegel. Significantly, Pinkard's book is dedicated to Hartmann. According to Pinkard, the Hegelian Geist has to be conceived as a fundamental relation, which consists in the self-reflection made by a historical community on the system of rules that they take for granted as constitutive of their form of life. Rules determine the inferential move the participants of a form of life are allowed to do in language, and the role ascriptions to which they are determined by them. I quote, "Spirit, therefore, denotes for Hegel not a metaphysical entity, but a fundamental relation among persons that mediate their self-consciousness, a way in which people reflect on what they have come to take as authoritative for themselves. The notion of Geist is then strictly and inextricably tied with the problems raised by normativity and norms, and with the language game of giving reasons and their actions. The Geist, 1b. The Geist has its concrete existence under some forms or configurations, the Gestalten. A formation of consciousness is a social space interwoven by authoritative norms. Every form is historically determined, and its development is described in terms of a history of failures. Failures are determined by the implosion of a normative system that is overcome and substituted by a different normative configurations, which adopts a new system of rules. I quote, "In this way, history, as a story of a sequence of events that are linked together in terms of their being parts of an overall account of how such and such came to be authoritative for a community, it is possible only in terms of the development of Geistes, that is, of the development of such social practices." This is at first what Pinkard has to say about the equation between formation of consciousness and life forms. The relation between the two terms seems to be mediated by norms, where the authoritative norms are the essence of the formations of consciousness. The claim of the total equivalence between a form of life and a figure of spirit is made explicit by Pinkard in his later Innen, Außen und Lebensformen, Hegel and Wittgenstein, published in 2003, which is also a significant occasion in which the two philosophers are put in a comparison by him. As suggested again by Corti, this paper exemplifies a small shift between his first reading of the phenomenology and the view I'm taking into account. The 2003 article is split in several parts, and my task will be to isolate the definitions Pinkard provides of the concepts which are more important for my books. In the first part of the paper, Pinkard compares significantly Hegel and Wittgenstein with respect to the strategy through which they become able to overcome the distinction, typical of subjective idealism, between the inner and the outer real, being able therefore to overcome a Cartesian conception of the subject. Pinkard then sharply criticizes the transcendental readings of Wittgenstein's philosophy, in which he is interpreted as a philosopher which sets a transcendental limit to our thought and to our language. Hegel and Wittgenstein, according at least to my comprehension of Pinkard's argument, are kept together by the refusal of a formal conception of norms, which seems to be negatively represented by Kantian position. Norms are, both in Hegel and Wittgenstein, embodied in social practices. Near the end of the paper, Pinkard establishes a peculiar and personal definition of the concept of Lebensform. I quote, "Was seine Lebensform zusammenhält, sind nicht nur sprachliche Praktiken, sondern auch alles andere, was in diese Lebensform eingeht. Menschliche Sterbe, Geburt, soziale Systeme, alltägliche Tatsachen, wie dass wir müde werden und Erneuerung brauchen und so weiter." In Wittgenstein's opinion, Lebensformen, as Pinkard will all those in another paper, which is called Subjects, Objects and Normativity, are reducible to the so-called gemeinsame Form menschlichen Handelns. They are therefore not historically variable, and they cannot have any sort of evolution. This is Pinkard about Wittgenstein. They are, Lebensformen, at the end of the day reducible to the common behavior of mankind, which is the common system of coordinates through which we translate words or sentences from a language to another. In a footnote, Pinkard will also make clear that Wittgenstein refuses any relativistic interpretation of the notion of Lebensform. Then, in Innen und Außen und Lebensformen, we can read the Hegelian version of this equation. I quote, "Eine Lebensform oder eine Gestalt des Geistes umfasst eine Menge von Praktiken, die selbst nicht Menge von Überzeugungen sind, sondern eher so etwas wie die Bedingungen, unter denen Überzeugungen gebildet werden können. As it is possible to see, the status of Gestalten des Geistes slightly changed. Formations of consciousness do not amount anymore, according to Pinkard, of linguistic norms, namely the inferential moves authorized by a normative system of rules. But now the formations of consciousness are entirely correspondent to the set of cultural and biological preconditions of our language game of asking and giving reasons." Part 2. Forms of life. After having made clear how Pinkard justifies the thesis I'm focusing on, I will examine the two concepts being equated, Lebensform and Gestalten des Geistes, in their original formulation. The main concept at stake is the concept of Lebensform, or otherwise said, Form des Lebens. As previously specified, this concept belongs famously to the philosophy of Wittgenstein, and it is almost always associated with the pivotal notion of language game. In the paragraph 19 of Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein states, "To imagine a language is to imagine a form of life." And in the paragraph 23, I quote, "Here the term language game is meant to bring into prominence the fact that the speaking of a language is part of an activity or of a form of life. It is really important to stress that Wittgenstein hasn't ever explicitly defined neither the concept of life nor the concept of form of life. It is as well important to stress that Pinkard does not quote directly any of Wittgenstein's passages in which Lebensformen appear, but rather provides a very general and vague description of that. Many interpreters have pointed out that the concept of Lebensform has been initially developed in the framework of classical German philosophy, among the others by Wilhelm von Humboldt, before being extensively employed and reformulated in Wittgenstein and other contemporary philosophers' work. Glock's hypothesis, shared also by Hegel, is that Wittgenstein had been inspired in using this term mainly by Oswald Spengler's book, The Decline of the West. I think it is worth now to mention two opposite interpretations of this key notion. First one, the naturalistic so-called view. In his 1968 article, Hunter isolates 5 quotations, excerpted from the Philosophical Investigations, in which Wittgenstein mentions the notion of Lebensform. His convictions is that Wittgenstein defends an organic view on forms of life, which means, in his words, something typical of a living being or of an organism. Following Marilène Andronico's reconstructions, Hunter has been a pioneer for a number of interpreters such as Cavell, Aller-Conley, and McKean, who stress the presence of a human natural form of life, which should be the basis and the limit to which the plurality of cultures should refer. This seems to be, as we have seen, also Pinkard's view on Wittgenstein. Second, the cultural view. Peter Hegel provides a deeper philological analysis of forms of life, not confined only to the philosophical investigation, but also extended to all the Wittgenstein's philosophical overview, in a very recent article of 2015. The same ideas have been expressed in his commentary to the Philosophical Investigation in 1958, written together with Becker. His main points, at least according to my comprehension, are two. One, he holds Hegel that Lebensformen corresponds, roughly speaking, to what is normally meant with culture. Then he claims that the notion of Lebensform is of little relevance in Wittgenstein's philosophy, and that its importance has been, in general, overestimated. This interpretation seems, in my opinion, to be suggested by a remark made by Wittgenstein in his Brown book, when he writes, "We could easily imagine a language that means a culture. In this case, with culture, as made clear by the Italian translation of the book, has been translated the German expression Form des Lebens." 3. Gestalten des Geistes as Lebensform und Lebensform. We have seen how Pinkard characterizes the notion of Gestalt des Geistes, shaping it as a precondition for our judgments and inferences. Rather than merely being a system of rules, a Gestalt des Geistes should consist in a set of practical and biological characters which define a community. The notion of Gestalt, which I suggest might be translated with form or configuration, plays an important role in different parts of the Hegelian system, and it is impossible to resume here all the occurrences of this work. For the sake of clarity, I will concentrate myself on the phenomenology of spirit. In his introduction to the phenomenology of spirit, Franco Chiereghin, quoting Hegel, has characterized the figure of consciousness in the spirit as figure of the world. Angelica Nuzzo has dedicated an article to the concept of Gestalt in Hegel's philosophy of right, whose I want to quote a couple of interesting insights. First, as well as Chiereghin, which links this concept with the dialectical movement in the phenomenology, Nuzzo underlines an important passage in which the notion of Gestalt is mentioned in the paragraph 310 of Hegel's encyclopedia, which belongs to physics. This remark aims to stress that the concept of Gestalt is partly employed by Hegel with reference to some processes which belong to nature. This is important, according to Nuzzo, also in order to understand the systematic role of this concept in the Grundlinie der Philosophie des Rechts. I quote, "The theoretical model which the word Gestalt activates is the determinate negation, or the organic immanent self-differentiation of the self-production of a determinate structure. I can read it also in Italian because the translation was mine, I hope it was not so bad. Point 2. Nuzzo make clear in a footnote that the concept of Gestalt or Gestalten has to be treated separately with respect to phenomenology of spirit and the philosophy of right. Nuzzo's paper is focused on the philosophy of right, and she claims that the phenomenological Gestalten are destined to remain in opposition with the Begriff in the phenomenological Darstellung, since they represent only phenomenological forms of consciousness. Needless to say, this short recognition cannot exhaust the complexity of the concept of Gestaltes Geistes. I find anyway suggestive that both Kiergin and Nuzzo hint at the natural aspects connected with the notion of Gestalt. Conclusion. As I have had in the introduction, I think that this recognition might have some interesting sides, although I remain mainly skeptical about Pinkard's aims and results. The first critical point I want to make concerns a philosophical mistake, which seems to be quite obvious. It is almost impossible, in my opinion, to succeed in interpreting a highly complex Hegelian notion with a concept which belong to Wittgenstein's philosophy. That is a difficult interpretation, and this move cannot be helped by the definition of Lebensform elaborated by Pinkard. The second point concerns a positive side of Pinkard's interpretation, namely the interesting combination of nature and culture which is displayed both by the notion of Gestaltes Geistes and by the notion of Lebensform. The third point I want to make is a little bit more elaborated, and I have also to admit that I couldn't decide myself at the end about the proper elaboration. I think anyway that the big problem which seems to plague Pinkard's proposal has to do with the fact that he openly declares that the interpretation of the formation of consciousness as Lebensformen, namely his Hegelian interpretation, entails an historical evolution of this set of preconditions for our linguistic practices. But on the other hand, he suggests a different interpretation of this concept in Wittgenstein philosophy, hinting at a natural view about the concept of Lebensformen. I think it would be better for him to adopt the same culturally shaped and anthropologically shaped concept of formal life, both for Wittgenstein and both for Hegel. In this case, there is a difficulty which I want to develop more and more precisely, which concerns the historical character of Lebensformen intended as Gestalten des Geistes in Pinkard interpretation. I think that this historical feature of Lebensform would never be accepted by Wittgenstein, which never make explicit remarks about the notion of history and also about the historical character of forms of life, and only developing in a not so much developed at the end of the day way the notion of natural history. I quote from Philosophical Investigation, the paragraph 25, giving orders, asking questions, telling stories, having a chat, are as much a part of our natural history as walking, eating, drinking, and playing. The notion of natural history is not so clear to me, so at the end of the day I can conclude in this way. Either Pinkard would interpret, so it's not an either or. In my opinion, it's better if Pinkard would give a culturally shaped interpretation both about Hegel and about Wittgenstein's notion of Lebensform. This interpretation will raise some questions, important questions anyway, in my opinion, for all the interpreters which claim that the notion of Lebensform is a culturally shaped one, namely the necessary relation between history and any claim which can be made about forms of life as cultures. That's the end of mine.